Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Hamilton. I'm a professor in earth sciences at University of Toronto and a member of the research group here in the Jack Satterley Geochronology Laboratory. And I'm responsible for the yearly conventional isotope dilution uranium-lead age dating studies across all of the metal earth transects. You've heard a number of transect leaders touch on some of the latest high-resolution geochronology here, from the Chibougamau transect in the east to a number of the newer transects out in the western Wabigoon. What I'd like to do today in the relatively short time that I have is to show in a little bit more detail some of the dating results from some selected transects described earlier that I think are particularly interesting. First, I'd like to give you a little review of the geochron activities in the Satterley lab this year. Talk a little bit about how things were affected by the coronavirus and our shutdown here in Toronto. And then I'll touch on some interesting results from these four transects: Chibougamau, Larder Lake, Onamuntashoda, and Rainy River, which I think gave some rather surprising results and unexpected results that I think have perhaps in some cases significantly revised our thinking about the stratigraphy. And Pierre Badeau and Kate Rubing touched on a few of these things earlier today. We have a lot of other exciting dating results from other transects, including the Cobalt Transect with Shauna White, where her mapping has moved into looking at extensions of southern Abitibi stratigraphy from Cobalt east into the Pontiac. And I think there's a lot of very exciting new correlations going on. I'm very happy to talk about that if we have time later, particularly as Shauna's not here to talk about that herself today. We have some remarkable results from the Rouyn-Noranda, from that region with Marina and with Harold. We're starting to work on results from the Adaconac transect. I'll talk a little bit about that very briefly, but a lot of that is very preliminary so far. And Dryden Stormy, there's not much news from that this year. And I think Ben is properly focusing a lot of his efforts on in situ dating with the laser ablation work on zircons and other phases in there. That was very exciting to hear this morning. And then I do have, with Chong's study in sturgeon, I do have new results, but I wasn't planning to talk about them today because I probably won't have enough time, but I have the data in hand, and if anybody wants to talk about that, there are some interesting new additions to the volcanic stratigraphy there that we have very good age constraints on. So I better move on. Let's go to the first area. Like I said, we'll move from east to west, starting in the Chibougamau transect. Oh, sorry, jumping ahead of myself here. Just talking about sample progress during COVID here. So we had gotten started in the 2019 to 2020 samples, and we were quite a good ways through it before COVID hit in last March, and we ended up getting shut down for about 13 straight weeks here, and then we were allowed to reapply to restart our laboratory if we could do it safely, and we did so. But we lost about a month probably in calibrating the instruments and various other things. And but all things considered, we've been operating nearly full capacity, but around each other in a limited way and with a reduced staff. But what I can say is that you can see from the numbers here, for the 2019-2020 samples, we got a total of 43 samples submitted to us, 6 of which had, from 2019 to 2020, 6 of which had no datable phases recovered or zircons that were too poor in quality to obtain a decent age from. But we got very good data, I would say, from about 37 of those 43 submitted. So that's not a bad batting average for that. The 2020 to 2021 samples, I'm sure a lot of people are interested in knowing, having an update on what their status is. All of those samples have been put through mineral separation. I think we've got decent zircon recovery from all of those. And I got preliminary data for 5 samples, and many of the other samples are well through the process of being prepared for analysis on the mass spec. So you should be expecting some more data fairly soon. All right, so let's start in the Chibougamau area. Pierre gave a great talk earlier, giving a general geological overview of the situation there. If you look at that map, you can see that a lot of the green on here are the volcanic rocks, and shown in the stars here, in the orange stars, are places where we've obtained ID TIMS data for various members of the volcanic stratigraphy. The blue stars are things that are sedimentary rocks, where Pierre has been working on detrital zircon studies via laser ablation ICP-MS. Of course, as the transect years have gone on, the teams have been working increasingly further in the south, and we had this huge, or this vast area occupying about almost the entire lower half of this map, in which much of the stratigraphy had been mapped as Obatogamo Formation, which is, of course, is the primary mafic member of the Cycle 1 volcanism in the Chibougamau area, overlain by felsic volcanics of the Wakanichi. And then, of course, that is overlain and exposed primarily to a known extent in the northern half of the transect, where we have Cycle 2 mafic lavas of the Bruno Formation, and then overlying that Blondo Formation. And then, of course, there's the sedimentary sequences of the Opamiska and so on, as Pierre described earlier. Now, diagnostic in the northern volcanic belt here of the Chibougamau transect are these gabbroic sills that are intrusive into the Blondo Formation, or the contact, the upper part of the Bruno and the Blondo Formation. And they gave an age that Jim Mortensen obtained of about 2717 back in 1993. And so when the guys were working down in the Obatogamo recently, you know, it's a vast sea, largely of mafic volcanics, and presumed to be Obatogamo, but they did recognize that there are areas where there are a lot of gabbroic sills. And so they sampled one of them. And this is what I recovered some zircon from that. You can see how poor the quality is of these grains. And quite frankly, when I went to chemically abrade them, that is, anneal them and then etch them in HF acid for hours, I didn't expect to have much left to analyze, if anything. I thought typically if they're very metamixed, they're going to completely fall apart. You can see how very turbid and cracked these grains are. Well, long story short, I did recover enough clear fragments from some of these zircons, and the preliminary analysis of those, of course, has yielded this age that Pierre showed earlier for a differentiated, you know, quartz dioritic upper portion of one of these gabbroic sills in this sea of mafic volcanics. It's locally interbedded with felsic volcanics that we don't have an age for there yet. But this gives us an age that was identical to the age that Jim Mortensen got on the Borvo sill in the northern segment in the Chibougamau area. I mean, that's a nearly perfect coincidence there. So the suspicion then is that, as Pierre was alluding to, that this intrudes perhaps Bruno Formation mafic lavas, and perhaps there's locally Blondo Formation, all cycle 2 magmatism in the southern part. So we don't have perhaps as much Obatogamo Formation or cycle 1 magmatism in the southern part of the transect, which I think was quite a revelation in terms of the mapping there. Another unit that Pierre sampled and described was this felsic volcanic down in the southwest, very southwestern part of the transect, shown in this circled star down here. And that yielded that, this is this Fui member, ostensibly expected to be part of the Obatogamo Formation. But as Pierre described, this gave an age, zircons, these really very almost gem-like, almost gem quality zircons, very typical of felsic volcanics, gave a spectacularly good age of 2714.6. And of course, that age is would put it at the top of or younger than what we know to be cycle 2 magmatism, but it represents a completely new age. It's older, it's younger than what we know to be cycle 2 Blondo Formation volcanism, but it's clearly older than Opamiska sedimentation. Another interesting thing is that this is similar in age to the Windfall member, Rhyodacite breccia, that we know of, that was dated from the urban berry belt in the Macho Formation. So, there's questions about the Lac Hébert granitoid south of this Fui member, south of this transect, and because it intervenes between that and the urban berry belt to the south of that, is an interesting question about whether that represents an uplifted, is this a big volcanic sequence that's just been broadly folded, and is older basement, being exposed in between that? Clearly what I think we need to do next is try to obtain some age information from the Lac Hébert Pluton that intervenes between the two greenstone belts. Okay, moving west, Kate talked about stratigraphic revisions in the Larder Lake region. I just wanted to touch on, just wanted to show you some of the complexities in this area. This area to me has always been very complicated because I never really understood the relationships in Skeed and Hearst townships. But the problem was that on this map that I show from John Eyre and our work in 2005 from Discover Abitibi, is that all of this, and Kate talked about this kind of homoclinal sequence, if you will, of moving from the southwest to it's a northeast facing volcanic sedimentary sequence from the southwest to the northeast, is that all of the material that was described as Tisdale or lumped into Tisdale stemmed from almost entirely this one age by Fernando Corfu at 2705, plus or minus 2. But a lot of the initial work, initial new geochronology that we did in the Larder Lake region, say from 2018 onwards with Sean Brace and with Kate, showed that there's fragmental felsic volcanics in here that are actually 2689 to 2686 in age. That's equivalent to Christ Formation fragmental felsic volcanics that we know of at the base of the Porcupine. And that sample of Corfu's was kind of intimately surrounded there by this Porcupine assemblage material, it seems, sediments and volcanics. So the question is that 2705 age reliable? Is that Tisdale age reliable? So I've gone back to our archival separates from which that original age was made by Corfu. It was initially collected by Paul Nunes in 1977. And I picked through some of the remaining zircon separates, and I've got some prepared, and they're going into the mass spec very soon. And we'll be able to tell then in this reinvestigation of that sample whether it is really Tisdale age 2705 or whether it's Christ age, for example, 2680, let's say 2686, 2689, and what Fernando dated perhaps was xenochrist, because the Christ formation is also full of older xenochristic material from the underlying volcanic stratigraphy. Just to step, this figure just is also from the same map of John's, stepping out to see the broader picture. There you can see in the southwest, the Round Lake Batholith, Stoughton Roquemar sequence, intervening out of sequence Upper Blake River, and then this kind of problematic Tisdale, all in blue, and then overlain by Porcupine in gray here. And there's Corfu's circled sample. That was its location. And Kate sampled two other new samples here in the McElroy assemblage, and I'm going to show you the results from them. And then we'll talk about another sample from up here that she also briefly mentioned from Boston Township at the Adams mine, to see whether we can provide a better assessment of just what's going on there. So these are the results from those two felsic volcanics. One sample, if you notice, is so the Lincoln-Nipissing shear zone runs through here in between these two red stars from the northwest to the southeast. And so the sample to the south of the Lincoln-Nipissing shear zone gave an age of 2716.9. That correlates, as Kate alluded to the transition between lower and upper Kidd Monroe assemblage rocks, not Tisdale, and nor Skeet, or what we would call Upper Blake River, perhaps. And then north of the Lincoln-Nipissing shear zone, another coherent aetheric rhyolite yielded zircons that gave an age of 2712.9, and that correlates exactly as we might have expected with Upper Kidd Monroe assemblage, not Tisdale. So as Kate said, we're now, I think, prepared to completely revise our thinking about the stratigraphy in here. Upper Blake River assemblage aside, sitting on top of this. It seems very well constrained in here now, and especially so if you look at the data for this Boston Township sample that was dated by this lab back in the around 1998 or 1999. This sample, this is a heterolithic tuff breccia with ultramafic, mafic class, felsic volcanic class, cherts, and massive sulfide class. And that gave an age of, from two fractions only, of 2711.5. So again, that fits very well with an assignment to the Upper Kidd Monroe. There's a little bit of inheritance here from the underlying Stoughton Roquemar, probably. So, whoops. And I think a lot of this makes sense because there's quite a lot of ultramafic material in here as well, mafic to ultramafic volcanics intermixed, and that makes completely good sense with Upper Kidd Monroe. So the question then is, well, what's the rest of this Larder Lake group to the north of that? And is there actually proper Tisdale age material there? I can see I'm going to be running very short on time here, so I'm going to have to race through the rest of this. Over in the Onaman-Teshota belt, I'm just going to quickly describe, just to follow up on Susanna's talk earlier, some results we have for that constrain the timing of host magmatism and later mineralization at Ishkade and the Minor Lake deposit here in the eastern Wabigoon. So here's the situation down in this Ishkade area. You can see that the volcanic stratigraphy here is, we have a lot of synvolcanic plutons hosting breccia-style mineralization. The timing of magmatism in here is pretty tightly constrained. We've got an Elmhurst-Rickaby dacite at 2740.6. You can read these for yourselves. We have the later cross-cutting Cadby pluton at 2734. So within the span of 5 or 6 million years, we've got a lot of magmatic activity going on here. In this, at Ishkade, we've got the host had been dated, plutonic host had been dated, an intermediate intrusion at 2740.2, plus or minus 0.8. And Keaton Strongman found some amazing syn hydrothermal activity, intermediate quartz feldspar ferric intermediate dikes that cuts the stalkwork veins and the mineralized breccias. Those have a population of zircons with very distinct low uranium and low thorium uranium ratios that yield an age of 2736.6 plus or minus 1.3. So that nicely then brackets the mineralization, timing of mineralization there between 2740.2 and 2736.6. So that's quite tight. And I think these dikes are actually carrying, you can see these dashed ellipses here that are slightly older. Those have 7.6 ages that are 2740 point or so, and they're probably just inherited from the intermediate intrusive host that the dike cuts. How am I doing, Ross?
You only got a couple minutes, Mike. Got to wrap it up.
Okay. Oops. Okay, similar situation at Minor Lake. Here we don't have cross-cutting relationship for the mineralization, but we have a situation where we have the Minor Lake intrusion that is cut by mineralized breccia pipes. So we can establish a maximum age for the mineralization at Minor Lake. And here you can see a nice zircon population that yields a very tightly constrained result at 2737 plus or minus 0.8. That's perfectly fitting in with these other ages here between the volcanism and the magmatism. It's all happening at the same time. A very active magmatic hydrothermal system going on here. And that the age probably coincides somewhat with the timing of the Elmhurst pluton. And then finally, I was just going to say at the Rainy River deposit, Gaetan gave a great talk describing the general geology here. There had been some previous geochronology by Vicki McNichol and myself. I obtained some ages for the hanging wall dacite at the Rainy River deposit itself, previously at 2716. You can see these numbers and the host dacite there. And Vicki McNichol's ages are very close. I mean, they're identical. So the timing of the host volcanics, felsic volcanics there at the deposit are very tightly constrained at 2716. This is new data from the Rainy River belt. Let me just step back here. Gaetan had a sample of a gabbro within the mafic volcanic sequence here to the south of the deposit. And I actually got zircon out of that sample. I mean, that's as rare as hen's teeth, especially when it's when you're looking for a magmatic zircon. That has given, they're very small and poor quality zircons, but I have some preliminary data that provides an age, a minimum age for mafic magmatism there at 2722 plus or minus 1.4. And you can see these other ages go down as in the felsic volcanics to as young as 2712, and that's very much in agreement with what what we know from the rest of the felsic volcanics in the Rainy River Belt, and what Gaetan described earlier. I think I'd probably better quit there, Ross, because I can see I'm running out of time.
Okay, thanks, Mike. You know, you're around for discussions as well.
I certainly am. And I was just gonna, if I can add one more thing.
All right,
one thing I've been working on lately is, those of you who are familiar with or participated in the production of some of these Western Superior NAT map compilations, is I'm trying to take the same approach now and try to integrate our new CA-ID TIMS data to update and build a new summary age charts for all of the relevant transects and the greenstone belts, and integrating a new column, say, for mineralization coded to different types. I'm going to need some input from some of the transect leaders, and it would be very nice, I think, if we could integrate some of the new Laurentian laser ICP-MS data for detrital zircon studies, for example. And I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. And you know, that sounds like a really worthwhile project, and you know, reach out to the transect leaders on that. Mm-hmm. So we have an opportunity for discussion, and you know, Mike has been heavily involved in all the geochronology, but in addition to that, he's been heavily involved in putting the context around the geochronology as well. So with field relationships and field work. So I think that's you know, that's an aspect of it he hasn't highlighted, but I think it's really critical so that we actually have good constraints on our H's as well.